So welcome everybody. If your calendars tell you that tomorrow is election day, then Monday the 7th of November, of course, is webinar day. We didn't want to prevent any of you in the US getting out there to vote tomorrow. But we're delighted to have you with us for this morning, this afternoon, this evening's webinar, depending on where in the world, where the expert team, Fortuna Admissions, will be focusing on non-traditional applicants applying to school. Diversity has been a watchword for business schools in the last decade, whether that's geography, gender diversity, professional experience, academic backgrounds, and we'll be taking a look at all of that today, really to share why you have such a great chance of securing your place in one of the world's top business schools. Now, of course, the webinar is sponsored by GMAT Club. And just a reminder to all of you that are taking part, the club is running free GMAT Club tests. And all you have to do to enter that competition, you just need to like this video, post a comment below, and link in the description. And with that, you'll get your free GMAT Club test. GMAT will be just one of the many things that we'll be discussing in the next 60 minutes. Just a few words about Fortuna was created 5 or 6 years ago, a team of former admissions from 3 or 4 of the world's top business schools. We've grown rapidly in those last 5 years and now have this dream team of, again, former admissions officers that were sitting in committee, reviewing applications, reading the recommendations from your recommenders, and they come from the best schools. They come from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Booth, Columbia, INSEAD, London Business School, Duke, UC, NYU, Stern, the list goes on. This evening, it depends where you are, but in terms of this evening, 2 of the Fortuna members are with us. We have Judith Hilderman-Hadara. Judith is a director at Fortuna Admissions, but she was a former director of MBA admissions at the Wharton School. And during her time there was a particular chapter of diversity and encouraging a very broad range of individuals and their backgrounds to apply to the Wharton School. Also with us is Catherine Ethel. She's one of the expert admissions coaches at Fortuna. Catherine was former Duke Fuba Associate Program Director. Now, between them, one of them is Sylvania, one of them is swing state tomorrow, but for the next hour, they're going to be focused on what applicants can do to really improve their chances. You don't have one of those traditional backgrounds. There are plenty of investment bankers, strategy consultants, software engineers that are applying to business school. And you may be concerned that you're applying with a non-traditional background. How do you leverage that? How do you really convince the school? So we're going to be looking at telling your non-traditional story. You may need to mitigate the fact that you don't have many courses on your transcript. And one of her areas of expertise is in resume development. She'll actually be walking us through the appropriate sort of resume to capture your leadership experience and the diverse background that you have. And then to anyone, there'll be stories of individuals with truly unusual backgrounds. Stay tuned for that later. But Judith, I'm going to start. Perhaps you can also give a few details about championing non-traditional, and then we'll get started on how those profiles can put their best foot forward.
Sure. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm so glad to be able to be with everybody today. And while I was at Wharton as a senior associate and then as acting director, I really went out of my way to look for individuals that were coming to apply to business school from a non-traditional background. And that can mean everything from coming in with absolutely no business experience to coming in with a very academic bent, perhaps The student in question had come up through a PhD program and it was now looking to segue into business. Certainly, we had individuals that had been in very unrelated fields. We had folks that had been educators. We had individuals that had been involved in nonprofits. We had individuals that had been musicians and were interested in sort of getting more into the business of running theater or opera companies. So while I was at Wharton, my goal was really to add to the diversity of the incoming class, which at that time was about 820. And I felt that it was important to look at diversity, not just in terms of gender, not just in terms of education, not just in terms of geographic or cultural background, but really how those individuals that were coming in with a very, very different mindset were going to be able to add their point of view to the classroom discussion and to the learning teams. So specifically at Wharton, where so much of the work was done sort of in these smaller teams, having someone that was coming from a very atypical background was really an important part of building the class. And in any given year, I would say between a good 9 to 10% of the class was coming in with sort of a background that by most lights would have been considered sort of out of the box and not somebody that was sort of necessarily a shoo-in for business school or maybe hadn't even thought that this could be a possibility.
Great. Well, and I think the PowerPoints later on for Catherine talking about resume. Judith, if you're screen sharing at this moment, we'll come back to those slides later on. Maybe we start with undergrad, where person's particular academic passions surface, and whether they are in liberal arts or STEM backgrounds. You end up seeing individuals with lots of professional backgrounds, medical school and so forth. So in this current age, with diversity as a watchword for the business schools, is that actually a good thing, Judith, in terms of coming in from 8 years of medical studies or a background in communications and advertising?
Certainly. I think that sometimes people don't always make that connection between what they've done before and how they see themselves moving forward with what they understand from their own backgrounds. And Catherine, again, will be addressing that in a few minutes. But it is certainly possible to draw that trajectory, as long as you can explain to an admissions committee what you've been doing and how you see yourself moving forward within that context. So if you're starting out from a very let's say you've been in medical residency, but you're sort of interested in bringing new drugs to market, or you want to work for, addressing problems in American healthcare. How do you take what you've done and figure out what you need from a business school opportunity to then translate that into your next steps? So don't forget that directors of career management do sit on the admissions committees as well, and they want to make sure that you're going to be viable in whatever it is that you're choosing to do. So being able to connect the dots, which is something that is so important for applicants, to be able to show, yes, I've been a classroom teacher. I'm really, really interested in issues of curriculum development on a global scale. How can I take what I know and translate that into a larger forum? How can I take that and make it into a company? How do I see myself taking these ideas I have about being at the forefront of education, taking it out of my 6th grade classroom and applying it to a bigger stage? So all the way through, there are lots of different ways. I'm working with a young man now who has actually been involved in a design company, and he works for a fashion house, and he has incredible ideas about what this means on a global scale, and how can these designs then be mass produced, for example? How can it be done equitably and fairly? How can the individuals that are reproducing these designs make a living wage? So it's all part of his real passion for this idea, but he's trying to figure out, how does a business school allow him to sort of take it from where he is to a much bigger stage.
Right. And again, Judith, if you can turn off the slide sharing, that would be great at this point.
Sure.
Catherine, we all make academic choices in our late teens and early 20s. Then business school, in fact, as an opportunity to really make a career shift in this notion transition through your MBA. So to what extent, from your experience in sort of career development, does the undergraduate studies that we've chosen need to define future career goals that you have?
Yeah, I think it's changed so much over the past 9 years or so. And part of it is a function of the economy, which happened to plummet while I was at Fuqua. And we had to adjust our career development strategies based on that economy. But I think, in a good economy, which we are now seeing again, employers are so much more willing to take people with diverse backgrounds, right? And it actually can be appealing. And I think in many cases, employers love liberal arts backgrounds, because in liberal arts, you are taught how to think, right? And there's some skills that come along with that background that we may or may not get in other disciplines that may be technical or very business focused. So I think, employers, admissions committees, career development staff, we're all interested in and excited about people who come from different backgrounds because of the unique viewpoint that they bring and the skills that they bring. And you have this incredible opportunity to stand out in the process, right, and pique someone's interest on the admissions committee. I think the key is keeping it, right, and making sure that that story is clearly woven throughout your application, whether that's your resume, whether that's your essays, whether that's your career goals. It all really needs to come together, and you need to be able to show a clear plan in terms of how you want to build on the skills that you've developed so far through your education, through your work experience, combined with an MBA to be successful long-term. Because as Judith said, oftentimes there is a career director, right, a dean of career development, who is sitting in on those reviews and weighing in on non-traditional applicants to say, yes, I've seen this happen successfully before. This person's story makes sense, or, I may or may not have concerns.
And presumably beyond the transcript and courses that you've majored on, whether they were in economics or business administration and computer science versus very humanities-based subjects, college is more than just the classroom. And there are a number of other activities that you can then have been involved with, whether it was the student newspaper, literary review, things that go far beyond that academic background and show the sort of leadership development and potential that you'll have and you want to explore when you arrive at business school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and showing that story through different parts of the application. Judith, go ahead.
No, I'm nodding because it is so important. Yeah. And sometimes people sort of don't realize that they've got such a wealth of information with what they've done outside of the classroom or what they've done outside of their work. They tend to sort of look at it very linearly. And in fact, there's so much, and Catherine will show in just a moment, there's so much more richness in what you choose to do in your free time, how it is that you've developed these other ideas and interests. And that really can help to develop what your career path will be looking like. So I think sometimes individuals are scared off because they think, oh, it doesn't look like I did this A, B, C, and D, but in fact, you've done a lot of other things on the side that do make a lot of sense and really together, holistically, help you to become a very, very strong applicant in the pool.
Right. Now, we've often discussed how whether it's the Indian male engineer coming out of the IIT or someone in the Ivy League that studied economics, they obviously have demonstrations in their transcript of a considerable number of quant courses. And it's not just Wharton, Booth, Columbia, and Sloan. They're apologetically quant-driven. Kellogg and other schools want to see demonstration of that ability to crunch numbers and handle discounted cash flow and big data. So what about if you don't have many quant courses on your transcript? What should you be doing for Wharton and the M7 schools, in fact, any of the top 20 schools, to show that ability and analytic skills and an ability with numbers?
Catherine, I know that you had worked with someone who had sort of taken our suggestion in that regard. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, and I have a client currently. Judith and I are working with someone who who comes from a bit of a non-traditional background, currently in a sales role, liberal arts major undergrad, and yes, limited in exposure to kind of finance, accounting, that type of thing. So she has signed up for a course at NYU in, I believe it's the fundamentals of economics. She can go in and do that over a 6-week period and really show her ability to be able to understand and do well in a more quant-driven course. We had a client last year who ended up at Columbia, similar story, and we'll actually share his resume in just a bit. But he also signed up for a course. He happened to be in New York, so they can take courses at NYU. But it's also, you know, completely possible to sign up for an online course. A lot of schools are offering, you know, executive education online options. And so, you know, anything you can do that shows, one, your commitment to this, and two, your ability, you know, being able to showcase a grade at the end is always a plus.
Now we'll be talking about the GMAT and the GRE, of course, as other opportunities to showcase your quant skills. But more and more, you know, Catherine, you talk about exec ed, but of course, the likes of Harvard with the HBX online program, you know, there are any number of MOOCs available on Coursera.
Yes.
Is that enough to show that sort of commitment, but also the grades that would demonstrate to the admin office that you have those analytical skills? Judith, is it enough to have taken the HBX course?
Well, I think that you really want to make a good faith effort if you are coming in from a very non-traditional, let's say English or history or art history or philosophy. Although I could argue that philosophy is actually great for decision making, but certainly you want to be able to show that you have the quant chops to be able to be successful. So in addition to the GMAT score, you want to show within the framework of your resume that you've had some quantitative experiences, whatever those may be. There's lots of different ways to present that. And yes, the HBS class that you've mentioned is certainly recognized. Berkeley has some online classes. You can do it at a local community college. There's no real sense that it must be at a certain institution, but my rule of thumb is even if you're just starting it when you're in the application process. So if you're taking a class, it's an online class and it starts in September of next year, you still can take it and still show how you're doing in the class. So it's really showing the schools a good faith effort. I care about this. I want to be prepared. And I know it's in progress, but I'm going to have it under my belt by the time I show up on campus. So some of it is really just exemplifying that this is something that I know I need to work on, and I'm going to be working on it, or I am working on it. So please don't let the fear of, oh, it's a little late for me to be doing this, stop you from actually engaging in that kind of classwork.
Yeah. And a lot of schools like Fuqua offer a preterm, you know, math boot camp, if you will. I think Fuqua does call it math camp, which you can sign up for, but that's not enough. I think taking, you know, expressing your willingness to do that, but then also proactively taking a course on your own.
Right. So any tangible demonstrations, which perhaps naturally brings us to standardized tests. GMAT or GMAC had the monopoly on this one with the GMAT for so many years. But when 8 or 9 years ago, Stanford and Sloan and other schools first started to accept the GRE as an alternative, it really was about diversity in the classroom and trying to attract non-traditional backgrounds that otherwise may have been fixed on other areas of graduate school, but certainly not business school. Mm-hmm. So how has GRE changed that landscape? And you know, does the fundamental requirement still remain that you've got to nail the quant section to show that you can handle your discounted cash flow?
So when I was at Wharton, we actually started buying GRE scores, which was really interesting. We wanted those candidates. We were looking to widen the pool. We were looking to diversify the pool. So I remember very clearly sitting at my desk and checking off the majors and checking off the interests that I thought would be an interesting addition to the pool. So we were looking for people that were coming in with agriculture, for example. I'm just giving you a kind of or literary studies, lots of different things that maybe had brought them to the GRE. Admittedly, you still are going to need to show that you've got that quantitative ability because business school just is going to ask that of you. But certainly the GRE has been known to be a little bit more friendly, quote unquote, to the liberal arts students or those that are coming out of a non-business background. And if you look at the concordances, and I know there's a lot of discussion about, when will the GREs actually be reported in the rankings, and how is this going to, sort of affect everybody? For right now, those scores are still very important to admissions. They still take them very seriously, even if they're not showing up in the global rankings. And Catherine, you and I had chatted a little bit about how that translates within the context of the application. I don't know if you want to share anything about that as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you on pretty much everything you said in terms of it's still an important part of the process. You have to show, put your best foot forward. If you're going to take the GRE, you need to study just as hard and just as seriously as you would for the GMAT. And I think there is, looking at that parallel and what does the score compare to from a GMAT standpoint, if you're debating whether or not to take it again. But it is harder to understand where you fall within the applicant pool based on a GRE score at this point.
Now, Judith, you actually used to participate in those famous or infamous school group session down with Dee from Harvard and Derek from Stanford and the directors of admissions from seven of the schools. You're obviously there wearing your Wharton hat. When you guys were having these discussions, one of the urban myths, of course, is, well, the GRE doesn't cut it in the same way, but there's Wharton, buying up names off a database of GRE test takers. So maybe this is a yes/no question, but does the GRE, in the eyes of the admissions office, count as much?
Yeah, but it is a very highly exclamation. Yes, it does. This is certainly a group of individuals that are very viable in the applicant pool, and so the GRE is no longer looked at as sort of like the one-off or not appreciated. It is taken very seriously. So for those of you that have taken the GRE, we're thinking about business school or not business, thinking about other graduate programs, this is a great way to see if maybe business school could be a fit for you. So again, whether or not it shows up in the global rankings is a separate issue. But yes, these schools across the board take the GRE and they don't have a bias against it. And we certainly did not when I was in Philadelphia.
Right. There's even that, of course, because US News is using it as part of its ranking, it actually gives the admissions office a little bit more freedom in terms of taking somebody with an equivalent 670, where otherwise they may have turned away from that person. Now, of 248,000 GMAT test takers, we've seen big sort of demographic swings in the last years. US test now less than 40% of that pool. A lot of that slack has been taken up by Indian and Chinese test takers, for whom the quant section, really is, what they do so well. The GRE is comparing you to a much broader pool. Individuals looking at graduate schools for education, anthropology, social sciences. So do you concur with this idea that, someone that's really struggling on the quant section of the GMAT, and also that very tough percentile rank when you're being compared to all of those aces from Tsinghua and the IITs, does GRE actually make sense as a way to secure a solid quant score?
So I usually tell students that I work with now, just take both as a baseline and see how you feel. And then, like anything, you're gonna have a predilection one way or the other. So as long as you're comfortable knowing that you could test better on the GRE baseline than you do on the GMAT, and all of the test prep folks will assure that as well. That they're going to support whichever you feel better at. It's a stressful enough situation. It's high stakes. Whatever you can do to have that day or those days go cleanly and well for you, the better. So again, it's just. I encourage everybody, after hearing us and after spending some time thinking about the business school application process, take 5 hours and sit down and do both, and you'll start to see where you're falling. And that, to me, is a great way to kind of get going on the process and understand which way you may want to go for testing.
Okay. Now we talked about some of the traditional profiles to business school, the strategy consultants, IB, private equity, software engineers. And often those individuals also then have access to, if you will, traditional recommenders. the VPs at the bank with a team of analysts, or the partners and the principals working at the consulting firm. So you've been through med school, or you stayed on to get your doctorate through college. You may be approaching individuals who've never written a recommendation for business school, or less sort of exposure to the business world. How can applicants work with those recommenders to sort of build up their familiarity and overcome any inhibitions or obstacles they may see?
Catherine, do you want to take that one?
Yeah.
You and I talk a lot about recommendation letters. So.
No, we do. Yeah, no. And that's a great question. I think, it starts with, and I'm sorry, I'm getting an echo. Are you hearing that? I'm hoping not. Okay, yeah. Perfect. So I think it starts with you really thinking about that plan, and what do you want to do post MBA? What are the skills that you already have through your experience so far, and what are the skills that you may need to develop, right? And it's clearly articulating that to your recommenders and sitting down with them and helping them come up with examples that demonstrate the skills that you want to highlight through your resume, through your application, through your career goals. I often start with people on the resume, and I think in general we all do, to get you thinking about those accomplishments and those skills that you've developed and the things that you want to highlight that best showcase your experience to date. And from there, use that to help frame your conversation with your recommender, to really make sure that they have the ammunition they need to write a solid recommendation. Because I think what happens all too often is that we assume that person knows everything they need to know about us and they can write a glowing recommendation. And I think oftentimes what happens is that it ends up too high level, and they talk a lot about you personally, but don't get into that skill set that you need them to get into. Those examples of analytical ability, those examples of you crunching numbers, if that's not a huge part of your job, if you remind them of that, they can at least highlight that within the recommendation. Whereas, without some prepping, they're going to stick to kind of the basic skill set that's required day in, day out.
Right. Judith, in your time at Wharton, of course, you have read thousands of letters of recommendation, perhaps enough to make your head spin. Maybe you can just talk to us about the fundamentals of a great recommendation. We've got the resume. We see what people do, their jobs, and you guys are familiar with many of those roles and responsibilities. So, what can a recommender bring to the table in terms of insights and perspectives on the applicant?
Well, I think that part of as Catherine was talking about, really prepping that recommender so that they understand that this is going to be very different from any recommendation letter they've ever written. This business school pool has very specific questions. In what context do you know the applicant? How do they compare to other individuals in their sort of peer group? And perhaps some advice that you might have given them over the years, and how did they respond to that advice? That's sort of the basic lowdown for many of the schools. And I think that recommenders that are coming, for example, that have been running a museum, I'm just using this as an example, may not necessarily string together the fact that you don't necessarily have a peer group, but how do they look at you in context of individuals that they've come into contact with, for example, or maybe they haven't had 7 or 10 young associates working with them, but they sort of understand the world that you're coming from as an industry. Or this young man that we mentioned last year that had been an opera singer. So he wasn't really going to be compared to all the other baritones on the planet, but what he was compared to was a person that showed up to work. He was prepared. He knew his role. He took on an opportunity to gather others to talk about issues with the staging. So he really showed his real leadership. So if you think about this, and I say this to clients and students all the time, take away the nouns and just look at the verbs. And that's really great advice for your recommenders. So what you do on a daily basis, whether or not you're making widgets or you're doing consulting or you're teaching 7th graders, that noun is less important than the verbs that you're using to engage with those individuals. And I think that that's something that you can work with your recommenders. You can help them see that that's what's really going to make you stand out. That kind of personality, those they may or may not be able to explain the intricacies of your work, but they certainly can talk a lot about you and your impact on the organization. Because at the end of the day, no matter what you do for a living, that's really what it comes down to. How you interact with others and how that whole community that you're a part of is changed because you've been a part of it.
Right. I'm just going to repeat that because I think it's memorable. The idea of take away the nouns and just look at the verbs and see what that says about the person.
It's a good one. And I say that to engineers also, who sometimes get really caught up in the nouns. Like, get rid of the nouns, just look at the verbs. So non-traditional, also engineers, anybody that's not coming off of Wall Street, investment banking or consulting, this is a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. We every week we're speaking to dozens and dozens of applicants from all over the world. We offer these free consultations and all of this sort of insider expertise that we're sharing with them. One of the common ones, we had this just the other day, a brilliant young woman who had done English at undergrad and, magna cum laude coming out of school. And all of the tech giants, literally Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, were falling over themselves to make an offer to this young woman with her humanities background. She turned them all down in search of a much smaller organization that would provide a far more international, fast-moving sort of opportunity for growth and development. Was that a smart move or was that a mistake? As we look at having those, those big brand names on our resume versus a far more personalized experience that you've, sought out for yourself, where you've then been able to grow in the 2-3 years before applying to business school in a way that may not have been possible in Mountain View.
Oh, I think that's an incredibly positive thing. I think it does become important when you're talking about employers that may not be as well known. The resume becomes very important. Different parts of the application where you can talk about specific examples of what you've done and why an MBA makes sense. But I think from a career standpoint, it's incredibly appealing. It also shows your ability to navigate the job search process, which, the career center directors will love, to know that you know how to go out and find organizations like that, because not everybody gets a job through on-campus recruiting. We all think we're going to be, part of that percentage that does, but we need to know, if people ask plan B, what is your plan B if your, career dream does not come to pass? I think it can be very appealing to show that you have the wherewithal and the initiative to take on something that's a bit outside the box, and then to own your own career within that organization and not just settle with that role, but taking on additional responsibilities, being able to take on leadership roles. I think there's a lot of positives that come with taking a non-traditional jump out of school.
Well, I'm sure, we're half an hour into the presentation, and by the time we finished, this idea that, there really is a place for people with non-traditional backgrounds at business school. Let me take 3 examples from the current crop of essays that applicants to the top schools are expected to complete. There's Stanford, the GSB is saying, what matters most to you and why? Harvard Business School is saying, well, what else should we know about you? And then, of course, Duke with one of our favorite essays, the 25 random things about you. Now, isn't this the perfect illustration of what makes you different rather than, what makes you look like everybody else?
There is no doubt in my mind that talking about, I am passionate about the future of American education, and I've worked for Teach for America for 3 years, and I've worked on recruiting, which TFA is one of the largest employers around the country. And I think from what I heard, the top employer coming out of Yale, that was the recent one. So this young woman that I worked with, TFA as a recruiter, and she's now, I've been tracking her because I'm so interested. How do I tell my story? TFA. So now she ends up at Wharton, and she's looking to do HR at Deloitte and has interned there over the summer. So those skills are incredibly transferable. And for me, it was so exciting because here's somebody that you would kind of think like, oh, this isn't necessarily going to make sense. But she cared deeply about how to transition and what skills she had learned from being involved in this very large organization on a national level. And then if you think about it, how she's then going to take those skill sets, learning what she's learned at Wharton and translate it. And that's just one. I have a list next to me of all these incredible stories. I know, Catherine, if you have one that you might want to share.
Yeah, no, I mean, at Fuqua, similar to Wharton, very much values the non-traditional candidate, and really wants to add that diversity to the classroom, to the teams, to create that ideal experience for students when they're on campus. So I remember during my time there, working with a number of people who came from different backgrounds, whether it's military. I remember a couple folks who came from a teaching background, both of which who ended up in kind of entrepreneurship and startup organizations. I can think of some folks who came from one client who came from a political background, who then transitioned into more of a higher level marketing communications type of position. And then someone actually who I worked with very closely through the MBA association, the student association there, who came from higher ed, who was an alumni relations development official who came in and ended up transitioning into consulting. So again, it's not at all impossible. I think people love those skill sets. So when you look at somebody who's coming from alumni relations, gosh, that's a dream for a school, right? To get somebody who can develop those relations on behalf of the school, who can help fundraise on behalf of the school. There's a lot of bringing people together. There's a lot of telling the story. So, they loved having this person on board, and he's been an incredibly engaged alum. It's just he came in and knew, what he wanted to do, and had a clear plan to get there, and was able to articulate that through the admissions process, through the activities he took on within the program, and then through the recruitment process.
Now, of course, with all of Fortuna's experience working in the admissions offices and at these top business schools, they have maintained all of those connections, and they still, regularly share with former colleagues. We had an example, one colleague that was talking to the career services at both Columbia and NYU Stern, breaking into private equity as you come out of business school. If that's going to be a realistic career goal, then you'd better have a couple of years of or PE on your resume before you go into school. So what does that mean in terms of perhaps the non-traditional background and the sort of transitions that they're looking to make through the MBA? Do they just need to be coherent, credible? Perhaps that's true of everybody, but any sort of guidelines or the sort of red flags that you would observe and say, okay, I'm not sure how this French high school teacher is going to make a transition into venture capital, and we may want to back out of this one. So to talk a little bit about coherent and compelling career goals for the non-traditionals.
For me, it's all about in the planning, and that you might not, if you want to go to PE, and I'm using that as an example, it's a big one, but that might not happen immediately. So you might not intern in a PE shop, but you may do something else over the summer that then in 3 or 4 years leads you to PE. So even for people that are coming out of like-minded and like fields, that's a hard jump to make. So there's so many ways though to really, and I'm going like this, I'm making a path with my fingers. It's that trajectory. You come in with a certain set of skills, you develop them in your first year, you intern over the summer, you continue to work on those skills, and you may find yourself when you graduate with a job that is then going to lead you to the next thing. So it's about being realistic. And we never say never. We just really believe that you need to be clear about how you're going to get there. And it may take a little while longer if you are a French teacher, for example. But there's certainly, and Catherine is going to show, I can bring up some slides to sort of show what a resume could look like that would then be compelling for those next steps. And it's something that we do talk an awful lot about with our clients. We really try to hit pretty hard on, is this viable? Is this going to work? We know you're passionate about it, but what is admissions going to say? So we really try to be the voice of reason within these conversations, talking about how to make that happen.
And in general, I think, when you're thinking about a career transition, the further you get from where you want to be, or the further you get from where you are, going to where you want to be, the more important your network becomes, right? And so you're going to have to show that you understand that. You're going to have to show your ability to leverage your existing network to proactively reach out to alumni who are doing what you want to do. So, if you are interested in PE and you have 3 target schools, then I would want you to go find people who graduated from those schools who are in PE. I would want you to talk to the folks in the private equity club. I would want you to show that you understand that this is a process. And, when you do that, you're going to show you have that skill set. You're also going to better understand what the skills are necessary to succeed in private equity, what the trajectory looks like, and then communicate it within your application.
Matt, would it be helpful
pull
to
up the resume.
show the resume? Okay. Let me bring that up.
Well, just before we do, because I think that's going to be a great section of the webinar. But Judith, I just wanted to pick a couple of on in your tool there, personal and professional, your knowledge development, sort of discussion, GMAT in this business year. They just moved the business 6 years in the school professional experience was sure it's some ideology. So how important is it to that planning and decisions that how it fits in at this stage? Schools want to maturity and self-reflection.
Certainly. Matt, I can't hear you so well, but I'm going to take a stab at what I think you asked me, which is really about the self-reflection and how do you start to plan for the next steps. So certainly, business school applications are not the kind of thing that you're going to decide to start September 1st to apply September 15th. Generally speaking, and people argue with me, I think it's a 9-month to a 1-year process that you really begin to think about where you see yourself. It's an incredible opportunity to sit down and say, okay, I'm 25, I'm 26, I'm 27. Where do I want to be when I'm 29 and 30 and 50? And here's a chance for me to actually take control. I graduated from high school. I went to university. I worked for 2 or 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. And now I can say, okay, what happens next? So that planning, thinking about that, perhaps setting yourself up. If you see yourself working, eventually in a certain kind of industry, but that's not related to what you do on a daily basis, looking for ways that you can start to build that sort of complementary portfolio, if you will. I'm working with someone now that's really interested in renewable energy, not part of what he does on a daily basis, but he's very involved in a community-wide discussion about it. So he's growing those skills. He's growing that vocabulary. And I'm assuming that a lot of the people that are on the call today may be in round 2 or maybe applying for next year. And it's a terrific time to take stock and really look at the ways, and you might even not even know that there are ways out there that you can start to become a leader in outside of your own field, that you can really start to do some research and understand where you see yourself. But beginning, and we do have a program called Early Stage Planning that we work with you to figure out where are the holes, how can I start to redirect so that when I apply in a year or in a year and a half, I'm going to be ready and I'm going to have all of those tools to be able to express where I am and how I intend to get there. And again, I don't want to frighten anybody off that is applying in January, but typically it is a process that can take anywhere from 9 months to a year. And that kind of gives you that ability to really be thoughtful, introspective, reflective. These are all words that admissions departments and admissions directors are really looking for in this process.
Great. Well, of course, one of those assessments that you're on is your resume. And Catherine, I think you've prepared a sample that if Judith can share the screen and you can talk us through that particular resume that you've prepared.
Yeah. And while Judith's doing that, I will just reiterate, and I shared this.
Everybody can see this, right? I'm just checking.
I can see it. Yeah. Can you go back
Great.
one?
Right
show
now,
that? Perfect. Okay.
Actually, Catherine, I just have the bottom part of it, I think. So we'll just sort of talk about this part.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry. We have lost the second part. But just to reiterate, I got a note from a client just a month ago who applied and got into Kellogg last year and is now in her first year. And she sent me a thank you about 4 months in to say, thank you so much for pushing me to be so introspective, to think through my goals, to clearly articulate them, to articulate my skill set, because she said she was so much better prepared than some of her classmates, because they throw you into recruiting very early on, right? I mean, as soon as you step on campus, there are networking events, there are all these you have to update your resume. And so when you take the time to be introspective and do that up front, it really does ease some stress that first year in the program, and you're one step ahead of your classmates in terms of being prepared for those recruiting activities that come up. So I would reiterate the importance of really taking that time to develop your story. From a resume standpoint, again, it's really important for you to take the time to think about what are the skills and experiences that I have that I want to showcase to the employer, and then build that, or to the admissions committee. And you need to do that with your career goals in mind. Right. So if, again, you want to go into private equity, understanding, what skills are important for someone in that area, and then thinking back on your previous work experience to identify where you have developed and showcased those skills. You can start sometimes with a summary. This is not at all required, and I would say, if you're going to do it, I would do it well, because if you lead, this is really the opportunity to lead with some thoughts about what you bring to the table, who you are, and what you want to highlight. But from there, I think you need to really make sure that you think about your accomplishments and articulate them in action-oriented bullets. So if you see here, they start with action verbs, and they are highlighting specific skill sets that would be relevant. So in this case, the person comes from a sales background, right? Which is not necessarily, it happens to be within finance, but his focus was on selling his product to financial institutions. And so we really wanted to, throughout the resume, highlight those transferable skills. Analytical ability. So in this case, identified inefficiencies in communication systems, and then worked with management to create templates that could be used by all product training teams, right? So this is communication, this is leadership, this is working with management. This is not necessarily, his everyday duty, but this is a specific example that shows him taking initiative. Here we also have some experience.
Just very briefly, Catherine, if I think, Judith, if you take, because there's great material, we're looking at a Colby undergrad who comes out years ago with a degree in philosophy, was part of the varsity football team, and I'm sure you'll be talking about where his continuing education and NYU fits. But if we take your computer, Judith, off full screen or slideshow, perhaps within the resume that's embedded in the PowerPoint, we can then just scroll or bring down on the slide the top part of the resume, just to get a sense of how this Colby philosophy graduate has developed in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Okay. I am not sure.
If you manage to pull it off, we're going to put technology on your own resume in the years that come. This is your challenge.
Oh boy, that's a huge challenge, and I don't know if I'm up to the challenge, Matt. So
bring the PDF or the Word file in your share screen. Let me see.
Okay. Yeah. Let me. I apologize for this.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I'm going to give it a shot. I mean, there's me asking you to do it, right? So it's only fair that I give it a crack too. That's this. No?
I'm looking if I can.
Can you guys see that?
All right, I'm gonna.
I don't know if anybody can see that. Okay.
Oh, I can see it. Yes. Oh, wonderful.
Okay,
okay.
Well,
good.
there you go.
Wow.
All right. I'm adding this to my resume,
wow.
everybody.
Wow. Yes, that's incredibly helpful. So again, here we talk through with the client, what are the skills that you feel like you have? And so we're talking about adaptability. We're talking about collaboration, which is so important in any business school environment. Communication skills, building trust and rapport, sharing best practices, mentoring others, right? Those are all skills that would be beneficial in an MBA program. From there, we go into the traditional format where we have the company name, the location, the dates, the titles. We want to show progression, which is always important. And so we have each position, since starting with the company, and the dates and bullets under each position. In this case, when you look through, and yes, this is a philosophy grad who managed to get into Columbia, we talk about quantifying where we can. So, in that first bullet, he is building relationships with some of the largest financial institutions, right? He's meeting with C-level executives. Not everybody has that ability to present, information at that level, at that age. Asked by senior management to onboard and train new hires, right? We do have sales in here, and we can quantify that in terms of, the business that he was in charge of and how much he was able to grow it. That speaks to his relationship skills from a sales standpoint. We talk about awards that he has, and actually, in his application through some of the essays, we actually built on this. And so we have this showing that he's this incredible businessman. And then in one of his essays, we actually talked about how that was a turning point for him, and how, he should have been happier getting that award, but it made him realize that that wasn't his ultimate career goal, and that was actually his pivot. And so, there are ways to communicate this information throughout your application and tell a compelling story. Again, quantifying where we can. He's in charge of, $12 million worth of sales, right? This is not chump change he's playing with. Feedback on a new product launch. So that's getting to a different skill set. But every bullet should be very thoughtful. It should be purposeful, and it should back up.
And even if you look at his extracurriculars from the American Bar when he was in Australia, recruited investors. That to me is a beautiful phrase. Reopened, it's very active. Ultimately, I think it was probably just a bar that he opened for his college friends to go and have a beer while they were watching a rugby match. But he really was using this, and what you don't see underneath this, and I'm sorry that we're not able to show you, but the other kinds of volunteer activities he's involved with. You might have seen for a minute that he did take 2 additional classes outside of work. So all of this, he worked very closely with Catherine to really sculpt this resume that you're looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And again, the American Bar, we talked about that in the more general tell me about yourself question, right? What would your classmates want to know about you? And it was the fact that he opened this bar, and it became, not only did he get an education on, finance 101 and sales 101, but he's that guy. He's the guy that figures out how to get people together, how to bring people together, how to, find the perfect place to watch the game, that type of thing. So, this is such an important place to start, and then you can build on that and share these themes throughout the application.
Great. Of time, because now it's 5 minutes. 2-3 months ago, with director of admissions at INSEAD, the entire GMAT resume building, and that's available on the Fortuna website. And people are to view that, because I know that there are any number of sort of tips, advice, help that resume, and making those little comments describing for this guy. I suppose as we just pull everything together in the remaining minutes. When you think about opera, you might think about Paris or New York, but you don't always think about opera, New York, and MBAs. But you gave the example of Judith. The industries show that they, have understood their own personal narrative and where it fits in with business school. Next thing you know, they get an offer, and in certain cases, some significant tuition scholarships.
Yeah, because these clients and these students, and if I try to get back to show you our faces, I might lose everybody, so I apologize. But these students are really very much in demand from the schools. You know, they're not a dime a dozen. They sometimes have, you know, they feel like they have to fight to get noticed. And once they're noticed really well, and they're noticed certainly. I mean, I have stories and testimonials from individuals that have garnered tremendous amount of recognition, scholarship. We had a young man that was out of Africa that was working on how to get seeds into the hands of farmers through a supply chain management that he had developed. And people were banging on his door. You know, it was such an unusual, he had been in the Peace Corps, such an unusual background. And he ended up at Kellogg with a full 2-year tuition, room, board, because they were so excited by what he brought to the table. And here he was thinking, I don't know if I'm going to make it in this pool. I don't look like anybody else. And it was a really good thing that he didn't look like anybody else. Mm-hmm. So if you want to contact us, I'm happy to, and Catherine and Matt are all so happy to guide you, give you ideas, suggest that just because you don't look like everybody else in the application pools doesn't mean you're not a great applicant. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from this discussion today, that, yeah, there are some things that you're going to need to figure out, but you are certainly the kinds of individuals that schools are going to be looking to bring in.
And any thoughts from you, Catherine?
Yeah. Oh, I would agree wholeheartedly with what Judith said. I think that people who come from these non-traditional backgrounds have such an incredible opportunity to stand out. It is really about weaving together that coherent story. It's about taking the time to reflect on where you've been, where you want to go, how you're going to get there. And that is what we love about working with people, is helping them develop that story, asking the right questions to get you to think of skills that you hadn't thought of experiences that could be relevant, of answering those, incredibly overwhelming essay questions about 25 random things, or what would your classmates want to know about you. It's so much fun, and I think you have the opportunity to stand out, but stand out in the right way and keep their attention through a coherent story.
Great. Well, we mentioned earlier on the free consultations that we offer. So if you're wondering about your profile and how you measure up for business school, sign up for one of those. We're so review, discuss GMAT and GRE scores, and any of these elements that we've been discussing on today's webinar. On the blog, Caroline, Catherine, and other colleagues also share their perspectives, not just on the non-traditionals, because you guys have convinced me that there's a place for those people at business school, but even on the traditionals. If you're a consultant, if you are from one of those traditional backgrounds that apply in such numbers, and how do those guys stand out? So there's plenty of material on the website to check out, and all of this insider expertise that Judith and Catherine have so kindly shared with us on today's session. Again, thank you to our hosts. GMAT Club, as we mentioned, is running a giveaway where you can win a free GMAT Club test. And to enter that competition, you need to do is just like the and a link in the description. Could GMAT, find out about your levels, but certainly come away, I think, from this webinar with the belief that there is a place there for you if you have the determination to put together a winning application. So we look forward to you visiting fortunaadmissions.com and look out for more of these webinars at the beginning of next year. This apparently is the last GMAT Club webinar of the season. I don't think that's because it's election day tomorrow. The world is not going to stop on the 9th of November, right? Reassuringly. But if it does, it'll start up again in January, and more of my colleagues and more of their expertise to share with you on your own personal road to business school. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the morning, afternoon, night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.